What kind of tips do you have for companies who are getting into the field of video and they're
Mhm.
wanting to produce something? I mean, what
Mhm.
if you could give them a quick crash course on,
Mhm.
hey, how can you be successful
Mhm.
as you plan for a project? What would you
Mhm.
say?
Find the right partner. Because I think that is the problem that a lot, and especially as technology evolves, everyone thinks that they can do it themselves. But then you don't realize how much of a craft this all is. I mean, even this is such a craft. And so my biggest recommendation is, talk to the right people, have a lot of conversations, learn as much as you can, and don't be afraid to ask questions.
Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Unlocked, a podcast about growing your business through the power of video. I'm Dan West, owner and creative director at Blue Key Media, a Minneapolis-based video production company. And today I'm joined by Heather Bonneson, senior producer at Broadhead, an advertising agency here in Minneapolis. Thank you so much, Heather, for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Well, Heather, give us a little bit of an introduction about yourself and how you found yourself in the world of video and advertising.
Yeah, definitely. So my name is Heather. I started my advertising career 10 years ago at a post-production audio house, Audio Ruckus, a local agency downtown. Worked with a bunch of advertising agencies, recording their commercials, doing their videos, and always wondered what happened behind agency doors, and finally took a look.
Nice. And so you were at Audio Ruckus for what, 10 years, right?
hmm
Okay.
hmm
And then you transitioned just a few years ago into the advertising world, right?
Yep, about 2.5, 3 years ago. Started getting an itch to do something different, and just always thought advertising, wanted to stay in advertising. That's the creative world, but didn't know what I wanted to do. Didn't know like what I could go back to school for, and I was producing on a very small scale at the studio and thought, well, I could do that. I could do that on a larger scale, and jumped in, and they threw me right into video production and had to learn all things video because I was very familiar with audio, obviously, and thought, well, that'll be a simple like turnover, and no.
Yeah, so you just jumped right in
Yep.
and were you the first producer, or were you replacing a producer there on the video side of things?
Yeah, I was replacing a producer, so that was my in. Was knew a producer there, worked with her a lot, reached out to her, asked if they need any help, and she's like, "Well, I'm actually leaving. It'd be great for recommendation." I thought, "Well, why are you leaving?" First and foremost. And then yeah, so she kind of got me in, and I again just knew I wanted to produce, but didn't really understand what that looked like in an agency world. I knew it from a studio world, but not full agency. And so they signed me on. My job title was just producer, and there's no description. So they kind of left it open for me to decide like what do I want to pursue. This was right at the end of 2021, so shoots were just coming back on from COVID. So they started getting really busy and backed up on that, and asked me to help produce a few of those. And then it was just kind of no turning back.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And tell me a little bit, well, I know what a producer does,
Yeah.
but tell our audience like what does the role of a producer do, and what are you helping with at Broadhead?
Yeah, definitely. So I'm brought on anytime there's any thought of like a video element or photography element within a project. So I'm started right off on that kickoff. I just kind of follow the team and learn what are we looking to do, what's our timeline, what's our budget, and then working with the creative team to make their concepts that they make come to life. And so I'm kind of in that lockstep. I'm in that pre-production phase, working all through the logistics for the actual production, do the production part, and then it goes into that post end because then I work with our in-house editors to actually make that come to life.
Gotcha. So you're the logistics guru who
Yes.
makes sure that everything kind of comes together.
Yes.
And give us a little bit of a background on like what type of stuff does Broadhead do, and what type of projects are you working on a regular basis?
Yeah, definitely. So we're just rebranding right now. So our new rebranding is Eat, Move, Live, and so those are their three pillars that we're our goals or what we're working towards. So in the eat category is probably our biggest client, which is BI. So it's cattle, swine, poultry, horses. So everything agriculture there, which is perfect. We're in the Midwest. Move, our agency that we acquired last year has like Freightliner and Detroit Diesel. So that's all
Okay.
about like electric vehicles, which is super exciting. And then the Live, we're we're looking for more like healthcare style, a little bit more in the food industry there. So those are kind of like our three pillars of what we work towards.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Cool. I like that pillar sectioning
Hmm.
and when you said move, I was like, oh, exercise. But yeah,
Yeah.
that's cool that it's like the more of the diesel
And
and
transportation.
transportation. Yeah, exactly.
Something I had never thought of. We've been so far in the agriculture world they've had BI for 10, 15 years. So it's like all of a sudden with transportation and buses and things like, oh, yeah, I suppose. Whole new world. You don't think about that. Someone sells school buses. Who does it?
Yeah, yeah. Tell me a little bit about how you guys help bring video to life, and what does that process look like for you
Mhm.
as you're working on a project from start to finish?
Mhm. Well, it kind of depends on the client and the project, but it starts with that concept from the creative. So the creative will either come up with a shoot that we need to logistically plan out, or there's like stock, or lots of things right now is animation. Animation is
Hmm.
huge. And there's so many different forms of animation.
Yeah.
So they're like, we want to animate this video. I'm like, okay, well, how do you want to animate it? Is it actual CG? Is it line drawing? So yeah, I just whatever concept is given to me, I just start diving right in, working with a lot of outside vendors, getting references, and then just trying to find the right people for the right project.
Gotcha.
Hmm.
And how do you collaborate between the creative team and the
Hmm.
client and the production? Like there,
Hmm.
especially on some larger shoots, like
Hmm.
I'm sure there's lots of moving parts. And so, how do you effectively
Hmm.
bring all of these, like manage that and make sure that things are done on time and on schedule?
Hmm.
Because that can be difficult.
Yeah, yeah. Detail oriented. Lots of notes and lots of places. But I think it's about having a really strong account team who's like there as your pillar, as a client face without
Hmm.
actually having to interact with the client. So they kind of set my boundaries. And then creative, whatever they want, I want to make sure it comes to life the way that they envisioned it. So from them, I'm just getting lots of references, because I think that's a lot. They come up with concepts, but it's like, how do you actually see that playing out? And do you
Hmm.
have a reference to pull from that so then you can sort of mimic it? So it's really, I think, just staying super in lockstep with all team members to make sure that what I'm hearing is what they're envisioning and what I want to do works for the client.
Yeah.
So.
Do you ever have instances with like the creative team where they start like doing their creative thing
Mhm.
and then you have to reel them back a little bit? Okay, like
Mhm.
this has to be like let's make sure this is realistic.
Yes, yes, those are the worst conversations to have. So that's why luckily I get brought in so early, because if I get to that point and it's already been shown to the client and the client falls in love with it, well then, everyone's just kind of screwed there. So those are the worst sort of situations. But even in those situations, you find out, okay, so that's not possible. What can we do?
Hmm.
And I think that's one of the biggest jobs as a producer is like, I don't necessarily have a creative say or a strategy say, but I give them options. Okay, we can't do X, Y, Z, but we could do this.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I mean, it's something that I do myself as when I'm directing or
Hmm.
leading a project, like problem solving. And
Hmm.
like I assume as producer, it's very much that as well. Like
Hmm.
problem solving. Okay, what is feasible?
Exactly, exactly.
Do you have any fun stories of instances where like you've had to like problem solve a specific situation or
More PTSD sort of memories. But yeah, and this one kind of goes back to animation. It got an idea was presented to a client. It went full storyboard. Everyone fell in love with it, and then they brought it to me in production. And between the timeline and budget, it was just unreasonable, and it was never going to happen. And so to try to then creatively solve that, and thank God for my in-house video editor, because he had 1,000 ideas and was able to whip one up that everyone agreed upon. But it was a little bit of a daunting task for sure.
so, but you were able to reel people back
Mhm.
in and it
Mhm.
wasn't something that exploded.
No, no, thank God.
That's good. That's
Yeah,
good.
yeah. But it's production, so you never know what's going to happen, and something usually always goes sideways. It's just how do you fix it?
Yeah, yeah. And do you find that it's a similar situation in terms of, problem solving, managing expectations on small projects as it is with really big complex projects? Or as you increase in complexity, do things ramp up as well in terms of like what you're having to constantly problem solve or troubleshoot?
I think it's pretty much the same because the client wants the best, and no matter the size of the project. So any sort of problem that arises is all kind of like in the moment, big or small. Smaller, usually we can fix them on a tighter timeline.
Yeah.
The bigger it gets, the more stressful it is. But I think that luckily with Broadhead, the bigger the problem gets or the bigger the project is, the bigger the team we have. I mean, we really, really pull in everyone from all sides. It's like, even right now, I'm kind of dealing with the issue with like social, and it's like I'm not super big into social media, and we had to try to find influencers and things like that. I'm like, well, then let's reach out to our social team. Like, it doesn't have to just fall on one person and one person only. Spread the love, spread the work.
Yeah, that's awesome. I know there was one really interesting project I saw on the website, which was BI Equine and this like whole rebrand. What was the process? And I know you came in a little bit later on that, but what was that like managing? It was a very bold and creative idea. And just to give the viewers some insight, it's like using black and white orchestra and horses and like chiseling, like, these different really creative shots to talk about what was the end product like.
Art of horse.
Yeah. Art of horse, but like it's for, is it just medicine for equine or?
It's called the campaign was like Mastering Equine. So we have quite a few equine brands that for medicines and vaccines to make horses better performance wise and just feel better naturally. So Equine's been growing, wanted to grow their portfolio. How do we show that like we are the masters at what we do and be a little bit more personable? So they really target like vet owners specifically and veterinarians. So they wanted to pull out their heartstrings, and that was just like the perfect way to do it.
Yeah. I mean, it was really cool how it all came together. And what is it like managing a project of that scale or that creativity? Does it change when you start working on something like that?
Definitely, because usually there's more people involved, so everyone has an opinion. So those, you start in post and you think, oh, this will be easy peasy, and then you get to round like 4, 5, 6, and you're like, what is happening? But with equine in particular, horse owners are so passionate about their horses, and so that alone, it's like finding the exact right horse, the exact right shot, and making sure that they're not angry or their ears are right. I think in that one in particular, we had to go back and forth on the particular hoof and like what angle it was at. And it was
really?
just, again, things you don't think about until all of a sudden you're like, oh, okay, like I wouldn't see that, but put yourself in these people's eyes.
Is that something that was figured out like in post-production of like, oh, we need to be specific on the hoof angle or?
Yes. So that one definitely came back to bite us in post. And now I have learned fix it in pre. So that's start planning and preparing and for all those obstacles. And I think that our account team has now grown with our client as well, because that was fairly new when we won back that equine business, put together that ad, learned a lot along the way, and now we are definitely much more familiar with what our client expects to see and wants to see and how horses should look.
Yeah. Well, it's a learning experience, right?
Yeah.
Anytime you start working on whether it's a new client, like it's you're developing that knowledge of the brand and all of that.
Definitely.
But I like what you said, fix it in pre, not fix it in post. And that we had our own internal producer come on. We talked a little bit about that.
Yeah.
Because my editor hates it when I'm like, hey, we can fix that in post, right?
Yeah. I say that all too often, and I said it, and someone said to me literally, and they said, no, fix it in pre. And it was just like,
yeah.
like, oh my God. So that's definitely what I've been striving to do more and more now that I've got more shoots underneath my belt, more of these post projects that didn't go super smooth. It's all about learning and how do you fix that for future shoots. And this has definitely been key learning this last year, and now I know what to do and what I definitely won't do.
Do you have any tips of like things don't do and things that you should do as you're planning for video projects and and trying to keep in mind like, okay, how can I fix this in pre-production versus.
Right. I think the biggest thing obviously is all those planning and for video in particular, and something I never thought about is kind of those B-roll shots. A lot of times we go in and we have our storyboard in mind and what this video is going to look like, and you shoot it to a T, but then all of a sudden it gets in post and it's like, well, okay, that VO goes for 30 seconds and we have one shot. Like, so how do you, and so that's my biggest thing that I've learned. I'm like, okay, so we got to start thinking not only just your particular shots, but how this fits into a longer overall video. That's been something just very, very eye-opening to me.
So like basically just getting more coverage beyond the script that's there.
And that's also a learning thing, I think, for our creatives. We have fairly young creatives that haven't fully storyboarded out big video shoots. We come up with concepts very kind of black and whites. You've seen our storyboards.
Yeah.
They're very basic. And that's nothing wrong with that. But when we're going into these larger productions, and now I've partnered with a few other production companies for larger shoots, and I see how much detail goes into these shot lists and their days and their schedules. It's like, okay, all right.
Yeah. That's something that on our end too, like we don't like script out shot for shot a lot of the stuff. A lot of the things we're doing is more of the like docu-style storytelling. But we found the more that we can plan things out and be intentional, and even creating just a shot list of, hey, here are some scenes that we want to capture. Like if it's a piece about a person, figuring out what are the different like actions. Okay, this person is in their living room doing this, and then if there's a key shot that we need, we might call it out. But being able to just plan that as much as possible and get as detailed as possible is huge. And you can throw it out the window if you want. Right? When you get on set, that's the beauty of it. But you are so much more prepared, and it gives you that freedom and the like. You feel a lot more relaxed to be able to take those risks or deviate when you have the plan.
Yep, 100%.
Yeah. And are you on set a lot of the times for these shoots and helping coordinate?
Yeah, as much as budget allows. A lot of our smaller testimonial shoots I'm not necessarily on, but anything larger production, definitely, just because the amount of players that are involved in it, and then kind of being that production side, because usually we have just like our art director, an account, and me, and it's like art director's got to think of the art of it, accounts keeping client happy, so someone's got to be thinking about that post in the end, and so that's usually me just making sure is the camera rolling or things getting backed up.
What's your favorite part on the days of production and your role as producer?
When I get to sit back and watch it happen, when it's actually being shot or the photography is actually being done, and it's like seeing that like finally come to life after all that planning. That's my favorite part. A lot of people are, when I get on set, I've had photographers and videographers like, well, Heather, you're really quiet today. Why aren't you? I'm like, because I did it. I did my job. We're all here. No, this is not my show to run. I'm here to just make sure that we're still all doing it.
Yeah. Well, and I think if you have that feeling, that just goes to show that you, like you said, you did the pre-production work and you planned out everything you need to feel comfortable in. And those are the best feelings, because I've gone to set and been very stressed out because I'm like, oh my gosh, I don't know how this is going to turn out. I feel like this got a little bit rushed. And
yes.
Speaking of rush, that's something I'm sure that as a producer you face all the time, like timelines and how do you manage timeline expectations from the onset of someone who really wants to move things along in an unrealistic expectation, but then also just managing that throughout, and if there are curveballs, like adjusting that.
Yeah. So it's interesting, when I started at Broadhead, it was just me and one video editor. BI is such a tricky client to do anything timeline-wise because they have such a legal system. After you get done with anything, it's all got to go through legal, and that could take weeks on end. So for him and I, we would just rush and get something done as fast as we could. Like, we couldn't even comprehend thinking of timelines. But then once we acquired the other agency, brought on more editors, more producers, it was really pushed, okay, let's make and I started seeing how other people were doing them, and I'm like, oh my God. But now just managing them, it's really, again, just kind of planning ahead and foreseeing, like, okay, in a couple weeks, this person's going to be slammed. We got to kind of block their schedule. And then it's also reaching out and making sure that you have the right partners in your back pocket, like you guys, if all of a sudden, oh no, we can't hit this timeline in capacity in house. So we have to ship it out. So it's really just making sure that we're staying locked with our video team, what they can handle, and then foreseeing and forecasting for future events and having good freelance vendors.
Yeah, definitely.
Mhm.
What kind of tips do you have for companies that are planning their own projects and who are getting into, you know, the field of video and they're
Mhm.
wanting to produce something? I mean, what
Mhm.
if you could give them a quick crash course on,
Mhm.
hey, how can you be successful
Mhm.
as you plan for a project? What would you
Mhm.
say?
Find the right partner. Because I think that is the problem that a lot, and especially as technology evolves, everyone thinks that they can do it themselves. But then you don't realize how much of a craft this all is. I mean, even this is such a craft. And so my biggest recommendation is, talk to the right people, have a lot of conversations, learn as much as you can, and don't be afraid to ask questions.
What are I mean, as a producer,
Mhm.
you probably get faced with a lot of challenges that you're solving through. So what are some of the most common challenges that you face, and then what would make a project run as smoothly as possible?
Mhm. Well, biggest challenges are always budget and time. And I think that everyone would say that right off the bat. Um, but to make sure that they go smoothly, I know I say it a lot, but just really being involved from the start and setting those expectations early. When I'm in a kickoff and I hear a budget or a timeline, I usually will raise the red flag right then and there. But that also takes time and experience because a project could go 1,000 different ways, and I never want to scare anyone off or say like
Mm,
something's not possible. But you just kind of pull from your history and know like, okay, that would work, or oh no, that might not start running very smoothly. So it's more just kind of identifying those right off the bat.
yeah. What as it relates to like budget,
Hmm.
how do you handle situations when there is unrealistic expectations
Hmm.
with like, unrealistic budget?
Hmm.
How do you manage those conversations?
I used to get very worked up, and now what I do is I get the numbers. Like I pull physical estimates, because a lot of times, again, just kind of like if you're not in production, you don't understand what goes into production and why things cost the way they do.
Mm,
So when I'm given a budget and I'm like, I'll kind of be struck by it. I'll start pulling out of pocket costs. And I'm like, okay, so here's realistically what we're looking at. So then I kind of put it back onto the accounts table. And then they can go to the client and say, okay, if you want this big grand idea, here's what we're looking at. If you have some flexibility and want to cut some corners here or there, here's what we can do for your budget.
mm.
So it's, again, just kind of bringing to the table what's actually feasible and then giving them options so we can, and I think that's the biggest thing with having just a bunch of freelance options, so you can kind of go high, middle, and low, and it's like, okay, well, how do you want to proceed?
Yeah,
What kind of
yeah.
production do you want?
Yeah. And are there times where like you've been able to show them, okay, if we want this,
Mhm.
this is what it's going to take, and then the client says, okay, well, let's just move forward with that?
Yeah, those are the best. It makes the creative team very happy when that happens. So I definitely I like to shoot for that, and again, I hate trying to scare people off. That's the
Yeah.
last thing I want to do. And so if you find a good partner that's willing to do it for what I know what we have budget for, and being that I worked as a vendor for 10 years, I look at it that way too. I'm not gonna. I hate going to vendors and saying, "Give me a ballpark number." They give you a number that's too high, and then you're like, okay, see ya, bye. That's not going to work. It's being very honest and open with your partners and saying, okay, here's what we're kind of thinking. What can you do?
Hmm.
And then it puts it back in their court too. It's
Yeah, that's
Mhm.
great. I mean, I can't tell you how frustrating it is as a vendor
Yeah,
when someone's like, oh, can we have an RFP? Like, here's an RFP. Let
yeah,
us know what it is. You send it off, and then you don't hear a word. And you're like, there was an open door for a conversation on this.
yes,
Like, we didn't have a whole lot to go off of, and we gave you a number,
yep,
and like, let's talk about it because
yep,
you're right. I mean, I'm sure this goes for a lot of vendors out there who are
hmm,
working with agencies or other people to help execute on the creative. Like,
hmm,
um, we understand that like
hmm,
okay, this might not fit in the budget. Well, let's talk about what is realistic. Like,
Right.
what is the budget, and how can we get creative? And I loved what you said about like, you never want to just say no.
Mhm.
Like, we want to solve for this. Like, it's not
Yes.
just like a dead no, end of conversation,
Yes.
but it's more of a, okay, well, might not be realistic, but let's
Mhm.
let's see what we can do.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep. And that's where I lean on my vendors a lot, because that's just it. It's like, okay, if we only have this much money, what can we do? And most people they want to help out. They want to find a way to make it work, and they can bring me those ideas and help me kind of formulate that back to the account team, the creative team, and then work from there.
Awesome.
Hmm.
Well, Heather, I really appreciate you taking the time
Yeah.
to chat
Yeah.
and talk more about the world of producing and
Mhm.
video. Um, Let us know, where can people find Broadhead at and the work that you're doing
Yeah, I think we're just launching a brand new site, so we have a new website. Check that out. Pretty lively Instagram. Um,
at Broadhead Co. Right?
yes, broadheadco.com. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you again. And for those of you who aren't following Blue Key Media, you can check us out at Blue Key Media on social media and bluekeymedia.com. Feel free to reach out if you have any questions. But otherwise, until next time, thanks.